This podcast and every other podcast that I make is brought to you by Patreon.
Did you use LimeWire? I was like, that's maybe not a great question to ask someone who works in music.
No, I mean, I actually, LimeWire was kind of after my time, but Napster, like OG Napster.
Okay, yeah.
There was a lot of, I was a soundtrack collector and I really wanted the physical CDs. So I had very little use for for Napster. But the big exception was there were a lot of things that were like otherwise not available. It wasn't that they were like unreleased that somehow some person would find and digitize. Wow. And you'd be like, oh, here's a score to a movie that it never got a soundtrack album, but someone somehow got a hold of the tapes, digitized them, and they've made their way onto the internet. And so I did use it quite a lot for downloading MP3s of things that were literally not available.
I feel like that's okay. But I also am like, are the cops going to come to my house now? Who knows?
Most of that shit was subsequently made available. And because it went through official channels, it was usually in better quality. So I ended up buying 99% of that stuff in the long run. I was never a fan of the kind of bands suing their fans or whatever who had that stuff. Like, it was a very Wild West window, and you could tell that it was. You could tell that it was like, this is a new technology that nobody.
And that's when I feel like we were at biggest risk of viruses was like, as a young girl using LimeWire, I was not so much at risk. But I feel like every boy that was in my class was, because of the amount of like huge boobs that would just come up for any search in LimeWire. It was all porn titles, and I'm pretty sure those were all the viruses, but I was never really interested in it. But I'm pretty sure that's how everybody got done. And now, I don't really think about my antivirus very much.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, Windows, like, I tend to never, this is where I'd be curious if our comments yield correction to me on this, but my impression was that basically the last few major updates to Windows with the Windows Defender is far and away like industry standard in terms of that. Like all your default McAfee and blah 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 are not really better than what Windows does naturally.
Is that pronounced McAfee? Is that how
as opposed
to
McAfee?
That's how I thought it was pronounced. Is it?
I always McAfee. Heard it as McAfee, but
there's a documentary about him on Netflix.
Really?
Yeah, the guy who made it. And
if you watch it, it crashes your computer. And
I don't know what it is exactly, but I think I remember it being like something crazy, like he killed a guy, like something nuts. I was
just about to say evidence that we've run out of subjects for documentaries, but then you immediately
McAfee killed a guy. Hang on, let me check if that's right.
With a virus.
Netflix documentary
programmed their computer like in a some kind of like Mission Impossible movie style thing where it like made the computer overheat and set the house on fire.
Hell yeah. The series is called Running with the Devil, and it exposes millionaire John McAfee's escape from the law. And I'm pretty sure there was an episode that was something about him fucking killing a guy.
Well, he's on the run from the law for something.
Yep. And not for making antivirus software, I assume. The leading question is, did John McAfee kill his neighbor?
Wow.
Murdered his Belizean neighbor as an act of revenge for poisoning his dogs.
Wow.
There you go. It's topical.
What a drama. What a dramatic cul-de-sac.
It's the only way you got to make a documentary. Speaking of dramatic cul-de-sacs, the Grammys.
Excellent segue.
Thank you. You went and you looked awesome.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. It was one of those where as evidenced by my uniform of my red stoic sweatshirt, clearly I put a lot of thought and expressive weight into my dress code. And the last time I went to the Grammys, I just wore like this. It was actually really cool looking, but it was just basically solid black everything, like shirt.
I think I've seen a picture
coat,
of that.
Tie. Yeah, it was one of those. Normally I do a little bit of color mix and match, but this one was just, I don't know, it looked cool. But dating a cosplayer changes the formula.
It was so good.
And so, yeah, she was like, I'd like to buy a like we literally went to a thrift store to buy a blazer that was convincing and not looked nice, but was cheap enough that she could paint all over it and basically have her way with it, and it wouldn't. Yeah. Like the one-off nature of it was going to be okay. And of course, she did an amazing job, and then made this little like tie clip brooch of a little face hugger, and then with her own, she had this crazy like xenomorph tail thing and the little egg. Was that painted
as well?
So they were actually hand attached. They look like metal, but they're actually silver painted pieces of cardboard because cosplayer.
Yeah.
And just like whatever gets the look.
Dude.
Because it really did look, even up close, it looked like little pieces of cut sheet metal or something. But she has one of those like laser cutters where you can upload a kind of schematic and it will do a laser cut on the whatever material on paper or what, and it can cut on cardboard. So she took literally from like an Amazon box or something and made a million of these little V-shaped things so on the template. I'm gonna
show. Do you mind if I show a picture?
No, not at all.
Here, because I don't want to pull it up. That's the best I can do. It's very blurry, but
yes, perfect.
Alanah is so fucking cool, Austin. She's just so cool. And when I saw this, I was like, dude, because you were nominated for Alien, right? That's why.
Yeah, exactly. It was for Aliens Fire Team.
Oh my God, it's so cool. You guys look awesome. Like, that's such a good idea. And yeah, definitely a benefit of dating a cosplayer is that you like. I imagine it was her idea, but she had messaged me before because I have a pretty terrible fashion sense and I'm trying to get better. And she was like, next time you have something, let me know. And I was like, I could just invite Alanah over and be like, here's my wardrobe. What do I wear at the DICE Awards? Like, it'd probably be way cooler than anything I could come up with.
She became in the like Latin American ecosystem, the sort of Central and South America world of cosplay. She became like one of the top, I don't know, 5, 6 of like she went to every Comic-Con basically in the Western Hemisphere other than in the US.
That's how you met her,
as a cosplay judge. Yeah, she did a Journey cosplay, and we were friends for I don't know, a year and a half or something like that before we started dating. But we initially met literally from Twitter when somebody tagged me. I think Sony actually. I think the Santa Monica Twitter account like retweeted her Journey cosplay because it was the best I'd ever seen by a mile. And she shot it in Egypt on the sand dunes. Like, so it was.
Damn.
Oh yeah. She was there judging a cosplay thing at like a Cairo Comic-Con. They had brought her out, and I think 2 nights before the trip, she went, "Oh man," because she was originally planned. This was right after Force Awakens came out, so she was originally going to do this Rey cosplay out in the desert photo shoot as part of the festival thing. And then literally 72 hours or something before the flight went, oh man, I should do a Journey one while I'm out there. No way. And just kind of made it within the last few, like the last day and change before her flight, and did the shots. And it was like all these websites kind of shared it around and on Reddit and stuff of like, holy hell, look at these photos. And it made its way to me. And we just became friends. And that's when I discovered she was a painter and started commissioning paintings. And then, everything went from there. But yeah, so the cosplay thing is like her hobby, but for this, it was like, okay, you know what? I know I tend to, it's not that I'm conservative in my dress. It's just that I'm low maintenance. I don't like to put a lot of energy into it.
Yeah. Low maintenance is a polite way of saying, really that's mine. I'm like, it's lazy. Like I, right now, am wearing this giant oversized PlayStation sweater and some tights, which is because I knew that I had boxing training today. So I was like, let me just put on the thing I box in and just wear that all day, which is like, very lazy. Most people get changed out of their workout clothes. I probably smell, but I'm like, I'm at home. Who cares? It's lazy.
Yep. No, for sure.
Maybe efficient.
Honestly, if you smell horrible, the dog likes it. The little mini Grant. Yeah, I was going to say the dog is going to approve.
Exactly. Who cares? But yeah, so I still respect the hell out of fashion, though. I think like when people do it, it's not a thing that I'm like, why would you waste your time doing that? I'm like, it's really cool. I just don't have it in me to like. I'm trying to care, and I had mentioned it to Alanah, and she was like,
completely agree.
Yeah, hit me up, and I was like, dude, you're so fucking cool.
It's one of those things that I want to make space in my mind for. It's like I want to.
I totally. That's exactly what it is for me. Is make space in my mind. That's what it is. Like I feel the same way about makeup. I think makeup is very cool and very fun, and when I do it, I enjoy it. However, I don't have the space in my mind for it. It's that I'm like, I can't prioritize doing this, especially on a daily basis, when there are so many other things I already have to think about. And it's not that I don't like it or like think it's awesome when people like do really cool stuff with makeup, especially cosplayers. They can do crazy cool stuff. It's just a different kind of art. I don't have the space in my mind to do it. Like maybe
it's pretty common that composers, like I'm very much the norm, I think, amongst my tribe. But there are a couple of composers that routinely just like, there's a guy, Dan Pemberton, who it's not that he's a like fashionista type, but he always dresses strikingly, like bright. He'll wear like a tracksuit that's bright orange or something. And it's just, it's like, it's very him. It's very predictably him. And the other one is Ludwig Göransson, who did the Black Panther movies and The Mandalorian. If you just Google image him, he's always dressed as if he was on his way to a runway show or something. I mean, he's one of those people that has made clothing and music seemingly equal places of personal expression. And it's one of those where I'm like, man, I do think it's awesome. And I just
Troy's pretty
don't
stylish.
Oh yeah, no, for sure.
All right.
No, Troy did tell me once, it was like, he goes, the day that you call me to say, all right, take me shopping will be the happiest day. It has yet to happen.
I've met Danny Elfman a couple of times over the last year because he scored a movie that Rahul is in. And he always has a really distinct and interesting fashion sense. Always a lot of color. I don't think I've ever seen him in a suit. He's always wearing something that is like so Danny Elfman in a way that I'm like, is it part of it? Is that you have to know yourself really well to have a good fashion sense? Like how... Especially when we're talking about like how artists, like people at the Grammys, composers particularly, when that's such like it's a less like market, like your image is not quite as marketed as it is for other kinds of performance
every
arts,
other
right?
musician.
Yeah, pretty much. So like for
I mean, there are people
specifically to like get really into how they look. I think it's just super interesting.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about like Hans Zimmer is right up there alongside John Williams as among the single most well-known by name composers alive. Like. But most people would pass him on the street and haven't the faintest clue.
Yeah.
A couple of people have distinctive looks, like Mark Mothersbaugh very famously has a distinctive look because he was in the band. Does too. Danny just kind of Danny Elfman somehow manages to look exactly like who you think the composer 100%. Of like Beetlejuice and Nightmare Before Christmas should look.
But he's also so sweet. He's so nice because it's the movie Rahul's in is called Next Exit.
Well, his daughter was the director so that adds to some of the...
Exactly. Yeah. So when Danny comes up to us, to Rahul, he's always like, thank you so much for what you did for my daughter. And he's done it almost every time we've seen him. He's so sweet and nice. And like, it was also an interesting one where that movie, he wasn't going to do it unless he really liked the movie. Like he was like, I'm not going to do this just on the merit of I'm hoping I'm recounting this correctly, but I'm not going to do it just on the merit of this being my daughter. This has to be a movie that like I think that I vibe with or that works for me. And so we did, and the score is beautiful and very, very different from anything he's done because it's a very different movie to anything he's done. But he's just like one of those people where you're right that he looks exactly the way that you would expect the Beetlejuice composer to look, but at the same time he's a really sincere, sweet person. Like there are some people that you're just like, man, you are just you, and that's fucking awesome. It's just really cool.
He is. If you watch on the Netflix, on the series, there's a Netflix series called, there's a few, there's the movies that made us, and I'm pretty sure there's an episode about Nightmare Before Christmas.
I've seen the games that made us, and the toys that made us.
Yeah, there's a movies one as well, but there's for sure there's a prop culture. There's a show called Prop Culture, which is also, I think I've talked about it on here. That's about, it's on Disney Plus because it's all Disney films, but there's definitely a Nightmare Before Christmas. And they interviewed Danny a lot for it because obviously it being a musical, you know, he was working on it well before they'd even begun animation and stuff. And so he was, you know, very integrated. In fact, I'm pretty sure he was dating the screenwriter. Like that's kind of how it all started to come about. I can't remember the particulars, but But yeah, it's one of those that you expect a kind of psychotic madman, and he kind of looks the part. And I've been to his studio, and his studio very much looks the part. It's full of like pumpkin skeletons, and it's like it's exactly what you would expect Danny Elfman's studio to look like.
So then, what's your equivalent of that? What's your studio? If this is mine,
I mean, you're looking at it.
Yeah, so like it's pretty messy, but you have a lot of stuff. You've got music, like you've got books.
It's not as messy as it could be.
I've seen way messier. Yeah, you're all right, but it's not like I'm saying you're not like the type of composer who's like got folders, everything's structured and perfectly clean and organized. You're not that.
In the computer, yes. In real life, outside, I'm very anal with my file organization because these folders get so elaborate.
Yeah.
But yeah, my whole shtick with this space is that I don't have posters on the wall of things I've worked on, and I don't keep like trophies or things like mementos, basically, of any form of past product. They're all through this door. Because this needs to be a neutral space that is about looking ahead and not resting on one's laurels.
Interesting.
And if I didn't have the space for them in another room, they'd be in a closet boxed up. Because to me, I always am paranoid. I just have seen so many composers who kind of like started strong and then seemingly began to kind of believe their own shit. And then their music just kind of gradually gets more and more bland. And I'm like, I think the only way that happens is if they're effectively each time going, I'm pretty good at this, I'm thinking. And like that belief is not what led them to create the initial good thing.
Yeah, or like obviously I have tons of God of War stuff here. I do have a trophy shelf that I love that is off camera, is up the top. Like I prefer that people don't see that all the time. But I wonder if that's a thing where you think about the thing that you're defined for and feel like you have to recreate that. Like maybe it's not all ego. It's like if you have God of War posters everywhere in your Bear McCreary, who clearly did not do this, to be clear, but as a terrible example, maybe you think this is the thing everybody knows me for, and you see it and you get the reminder of it all the time, and you feel like that you have to like put yourself in that box. You have to not stray away from that one thing. You've made it too much of your identity potentially.
I think that could be. I could also see that being the exact opposite, where you're like, I'm so desperately trying to get away from the thing that like it happens all the time that somebody, like for composers at least, it happens all the time that you'll score like a hit comedy. Okay, so using Bear as an example, his mentor was one of these legendary composers named Elmer Bernstein. Elmer scored, like he did the original Ghostbusters. He did a ton of comedies in the 70s and 80s, Animal House, and Ghostbusters, and Stripes, and there's a zillion of them. And then he also did a lot of like dramas. He won an Oscar for Thoroughly Modern Millie. And then he also did a ton of Westerns, like one of the most iconic scores of all time, The Magnificent Seven. And he also did a bunch of like biblical epics like the Ten Commandments. He did the original To Kill a Mockingbird, one of these legendary careers. And Elmer always talked about how he would score, he would do like a Magnificent Seven, and it would be such a hit that for 10 years he'd do nothing but Westerns. And he would just be like longing to do something other than a Western by the end. But then he would do an Animal House and have 10 years of nothing but comedies. Like Airplane was another great comedy score of his. And then, or like To Kill a Mockingbird and nothing but nonstop dramas. And so that's like a classic, the whole pigeonholing idea is a classic phenomenon. Now, I have heard a composer, a friend of mine, a guy named Tyler Bates, who did like the Guardians of the Galaxy and the John Wick movies. He's advocates in favor of that because he's basically like, to your point, if that's your thing, it's good to have a thing, especially if it's a thing that is like, mainstream. Like if you're a horror person, they're never going to stop making horror movies. Be the person that they just immediately think of when they think of horror movies.
Sure, it's probably easier to market yourself on the like slightly lower level, like not to discount anyone, but when you're not like a super famous composer, it's probably easier to market yourself as being the go-to for a particular genre, I would think.
Yeah. Oh, and there's plenty of examples of this. Like there are so many composers that you're like, you go, I've never heard, like say you watch some random film, you go, I've never heard of this person. You look it up and you see on their IMDb 50 other movies similar to the one that you just watched. Yeah. And you're like, that's how that goes. And it happens in TV as well. It kind of happens in games. But I think most composers aspire to the opposite. I certainly do. You know, with my all-time hero being Jerry Goldsmith, his whole shtick was just like...
Your portfolio is very diverse. You've worked on a ton of different stuff.
And that was always the goal. The goal was always, you know... Like if I did an action thing, I'd want to follow it up with, you know, like something really silly and ridiculous. And
you then have to.
like the thing that came after Journey was Monaco, followed shortly by Leisure Suit Larry. Yeah, you know, it was like as about unjourney as you can get. I mean, I don't deny that my heart. I really, really love working on those. Like I remember once when you saw the initial reveal of Heart Machine's Solar Ash, and you said something like, "That seems like a game Austin would score." I do like that I do like those kinds of games. Like I loved, you know, working on Abzu and Pathless, and there's a new one coming out soon that's kind of, I would say, in that sort of world that's called Strayed Lights. Not to be confused with Stray Gods, the musical. It was not my intention to have or Stray. Yes. It was not well choreographed by the puppet masters of the universe, but
it can't always be perfect.
But like there are some that I'm like, I do have a soft spot for working on things like that. But I also
we've said this to you before, and I still think it stands that you have a which I feel like Austin is like such a testament to you, is that there's a quality seal, which is if I know that you have composed something, it speaks to me of the entire game. If I like, this is before I even knew you, right? If you had composed something, I assume or know it is going to be a good game. And that I don't think applies to any other composer that I know in video games, at least, where I feel like that's because that's the direction that you come from, and that you like working with teams in a certain way. Your approach is, how do we collaborate as a team? Thus, you tend to have a lot of faith in the projects you work on, or at least that's the way I see it. I for sure think if Austin has scored a game, it is a indication that the game is of good quality. But maybe I'm biased.
You may be. That's very kind and very generous, and you know, one would hope that's true. There's always those cases where you work on a thing where, you know, at the onset, you know, everyone's looking at the concept art and the design documents, and it looks like this is going to be just the best thing ever. Yeah. And then by the time you've gone through all the hurdles and the whips and scorn of shipping it, you're like, we've kind of drifted off course, perhaps.
I mean,
and,
totally. Yeah.
But, you know, I don't know. I've been very lucky. I mean, I've never had to... Like, I always loved my friend Jack Wall. He worked on the Mass Effect franchise, and he's done most all of the Black Ops branch of the Call of Duty games, and a bunch of others. Wonderful guy. He's been in games for a long time. A story of his that I love is like my quintessential story I give to young composers when they're like messaging going, I'm going to go to GDC for the first time ever. What should I do? My number one advice is basically just taken from Jack, which was Jack worked in the mid 90s. Jack worked on a early CD-ROM, one of these things that I think would probably just like come if you bought a PC and it just like came with a little bundle of discs for things. And there was one of these games, I could be wrong about the exact nature, but one of these games, it was called like Barbie Island Adventure or something. Mm-hmm. And it was basically a kid's game. And Jack worked on this, you know, early in his career, gave it his all, had a great friendly dynamic with the audio director. That audio director then spent the next 15 years or whatever moving, I'm assuming, amongst a bunch of sound design jobs and not in a position to hire a composer. But literally 15 years later on Black Ops 2 was now back in a role where he was in a hiring position, and off of the memory of working with Jack on Barbie Island Adventure 15 years later, just called him and just sight unseen said, would you like to score Call of Duty Black Ops? And Jack's done all of them since then and done tremendous work. Yeah. I mean, really, especially I love all the big band jazz that he's done for the zombie mode stuff in those is so awesome. And so I always use that as like, when you actually connect with someone, the game kind of doesn't matter. Like if this is a career investment, it's all about the people at the end, because the product is a function of so many variables that are out of any one person's control. Even the publisher or the game director or anybody, even highly influential people on a project, can't force a thing to be great. Everyone tries their best, and sometimes reality says otherwise. And,
it's hard, man.
Or it's hard. Or sometimes it's a game that's, it's aspiring to a very simple, maybe simple's the wrong way to describe it, but like, I don't think Barbie Island Adventure or whatever it was aspiring to be Game of the Year. I think it had a very specific mission, and presumably or hopefully it achieved whatever it was after. But I always think it's very noteworthy that Jack made an impression that a decade and a half plus later, and they weren't like hanging out in that intervening period. It's not like they were best friends.
Story to tell Juniors. It's like every job you get, go for it, and that's because you're. And
I've been very lucky that I haven't had many of those Barbie Island Adventure. Like my first commercial release was Flow.
Yeah,
that's
pretty
a
good.
Stupidly lucky thing to start with.
Yeah, not that there's anything wrong with that. Like, I have friends who've worked in, like a friend who wrote on KOTOR. Ooh, apparently my internet connection is unstable. That's fun. A friend who wrote on KOTOR.
Yeah, you froze for a split second for me. But
yeah, that now is in mobile. And I know this has happened to a bunch of video game writers that I've known, people who've worked on games that are considered to be incredible in terms of writing that now work in the mobile space, doing what, again, potentially the wrong word, but to write things that are much more simple, less involved and less stressful as they get older. I respect it. It's like, it can be very, very hard to spend years writing a grueling, harrowing story with branching paths of something like KOTOR. And then you go to mobile where you have to write, you still want to do something good, but all the KOTOR work still leads into the mobile work. It's still game dev. It's still challenging, but like, it's just a different variation of that. I don't think those things are any less valid. I don't think they are like any less writing. It's just a different kind of writing, and it's about how much of your own time you want to keep to yourself. Because it's a thing that'll happen to me, I imagine, for as long as I work at Santa Monica Studio, is I am always thinking about what I'm working on. I go to bed at night and I'm thinking about work at all times. Seems nice that maybe in 20 years I'm writing Candy Crush and I check out at 5 and I wake up the next day and I do my best writing, but I get to just sleep. Like, that doesn't seem so bad. There's value.
Everybody has an evolving, continuous evolution of relationship with
and every
their
job
work
you
in that
have
way.
is a resume for the next job you get to, like, in a lot of ways in the games industry where everyone knows each other's so connected. But to get slightly back on track, how was the Grammys? What was your experience like?
The Grammys were fun. It was.
And why were you there?
What?
Why were you there? I know, but a lot of people.
We already established. Fire Team was nominated in their first ever. So it's interesting. They created this year a new category. They split the soundtrack category into two. One that's film and TV, which Jermaine Franco won for Encanto, and then the video game, specifically it's called Games and other interactive media, and there's technically 4 soundtrack categories. The Grammys is broken into what they call fields. So there's like a rock feel, or like, I can't remember if they call it a rock field, but there's for sure like a jazz field, there's a classical field, and trying to think of some of the others off the top of my head, but there's, I don't know, maybe 10 of those, and then there's the actual categories underneath that, and some of them have different, like there's probably, I think, 10 classical categories in that field, because there's, best orchestral performance, best solo performance, best large ensemble, best chamber ensemble, best opera performance, etc. And so, and actually, as a funny side note, Beyonce won. She became the most Grammy-winning person in all of Grammy history. Like one individual, she now holds the all-time record across all fields, all categories, of Grammy wins, with I think 32 now, and like something like 80 nominations. But what's interesting, the thing that they didn't mention was that who she dethroned was the Chicago Symphony conductor George Schulte, who was the reigning champion. And what's so funny is, because classical music, despite being relatively marginal in terms of pop culture, is extremely prolific. Like you could go find probably 50 recordings or more of just like Beethoven's Ninth Symphony.
Yeah.
One piece will have 1 million, each one of which would be eligible in its own entry every year. So all these classical music heroes, Leonard Bernstein, George Solti, if you look through the history of the Grammys, it's actually very funny that, yes, of course, there's like Quincy Jones, Paul McCartney, Adele. There's people that, Michael Jackson, that you would expect to see in the like all-time record holders. But it's solidly like 50% of those all-time most both nominations and win lists are dominated by people in the classical and John Williams, who I think is the 4th highest earning Grammy winner of all time with, I think he's won like 25 or 24.
Do you think classical is there because like, I love classical music, always have, like how in Forza you can choose a radio station. I love driving to classical music. But do you think classical is so prevalent there because I don't know if they call it the Academy for the Grammys, like they see it as more difficult, or like is it a pretentious thing? Is it that it's like, again, they think it's harder? Like, what do you think is the thing that makes classical above jazz or whatever else seem to dominate?
Oh, I think it's actually just that I think that they dominate. All I'm saying that they dominate in is that there are a handful of people in that field who happen to be at the Grammys again and again and again. And I think it's actually because there's a bunch of categories and there is like comparatively less competition. So like if you become one of the top conductors in the world and you're making recordings all the time, you're all but guaranteed to be Grammy nominated every year for whatever your latest thing is. Because there's only so many people that are going to be up at bat against you. So it's like the top of the pyramid is a pretty small place.
I guess I have
and there's a bunch of different categories. So there's like many classical opportunities. Yeah. Under classical, there's at least 10 different.
I have very little understanding of new classical, to be honest. Like everything I listen to is very, very old. It's re-recordings of old songs.
But those would all be eligible. Like if I did,
they're all eligible.
Because the Grammys is all about album SKUs, basically. So if I personally go and do a piano, Moonlight Sonata piano record, I could submit that to the Grammys and viably, whether I would be good enough or whatever, but I could viably, hypothetically speaking, be nominated for a brand new recording of a Beethoven.
So then how many Grammys has Beethoven won? Like if you look about the amount of times things have won by a Beethoven, wouldn't it be tons?
Oh, yeah, I would imagine it's like 1,000.
I bet you he beats Beyonce. Do you think he knew that one day we'd be sitting here over the internet talking about how many Grammys he's won?
I wish somebody, it's funny because I just thought maybe somebody has already calculated this, and I Googled it, and I love that the default response is, there is no historical record of Beethoven winning an award. So funny.
But he must have won a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think seen through that lens, I would imagine that Beethoven, Mozart, they're gonna be far and away the most.
Yeah.
So all that said, there's a few things I wanted to correct about the record as I look at Twitter going, what the fuck? Because I will acknowledge that the list of the Grammy-nominated video game scores is wildly different than if you look at like the DICE Awards,
I was confused about
the Game Awards.
Releases, how they did the timing was confusing to me.
There's 3 factors that people don't know because they don't know how the Recording Academy works, and that's perfectly okay. That's what I'm here to educate on. So first off, yes, the release window is not the calendar year. It's basically September to September, which is why Fireteam was included, and why, for example, God of War Ragnarok was not. Now, I can't imagine Bear won't be nominated next year, but it's a weird thing that September 30th is the cutoff for the album release date for consideration of the Grammys, despite the fact that they don't announce nominees until October and the awards are not until February. So
it does
like
strange.
You can have a game that's been out for months and like crushing it, but is still theoretically 6 months away from even submitting to the Grammys. So it's like just one of those odd.
They do it very
what
slowly.
Ends up happening? What'd you say?
They basically do it very slowly. Like you and I have been. I don't remember what it was. We've done a few video game juries where it's been the same thing. Like we've done a few of them at the same time, and some of them I find really hard because they're like, hey, you have 2 weeks, here's all the nominees, play all of them. That can be very, very difficult. And I feel like some of them they give you a month or whatever, but the ones that are like really short periods of time, it sucks. Especially I did a narrative one, so I had to finish like a whole bunch of like 20-hour games. That was BAFTAs, I think. It was really, really tough.
It's very
hard.
yeah.
I feel like doing that for albums aren't as long, but you probably have to listen to a lot of them, and you can't do it all. We can't just sit there and listen to it. Maybe like they give people time to absorb them a little bit differently, because music is such a different format to a video game story that you play through. Like it's just more time. Otherwise I can't, because 4 months is a long time to vote.
It's not that. It's actually more like 2 weeks, because once the eligibility period is over, a few weeks later they send out the ballots and they tell you, here's everything that's on the like long list ballot of basically everything that was submitted. Mm-hmm. And a few things are deemed ineligible or whatever and cut off the list. But generally speaking, it's whoever submitted, here's the long list. And you'll get sent a list of, in the case of video games, there was give or take 70 submissions, which is pretty good for a new category. That's actually pretty close to the average across every category except the like album of the year, song of the year. Those always have like well over 1,000, but it's always invariably like, even despite that, there being that many, it's just very obviously going to be like whatever Adele did, whatever Taylor Swift did, whatever, like, it's just going to come down to that, generally speaking. Yeah. But for these more specialized categories, it's usually around 70. So one of the things is that they also don't let you vote in every category. You're only allowed to vote in 10 categories across 3 fields. So like the soundtrack category is what's called the visual media field. And there's 4 categories there. There's the soundtrack for games, soundtrack for film, what they call compilation soundtrack, which is like when an album comes out, like, you know how Black Panther released 2 albums. They go, here's the score, and then here's like a bunch of like hip hop and cool fusion music and stuff that's from/inspired by the movie. That would be a compilation album.
Oh, the second
it's
one.
It's a totally different category at the
cool.
Grammys.
Huh.
It has its own.
Sense.
So like Encanto had a album album score, and it had all the songs. So the song won the compilation album. The score won the film and TV score.
I haven't seen it. I really need to see it.
I thought it was fine. I thought the score was quite nice. I was quite happy for Jermaine. I thought she deserved it. And the 4th visual media one is Best Original Song, which also went to Encanto for you. We don't talk about Bruno.
Yeah.
Lin-Manuel Miranda. So yeah, not surprising. But it also was one of those where it felt like 1,000 years ago, because that was last year's Oscar nominations. And that always happens with the Grammys because of the weird tilt in the calendar. Huh. They often pick up the previous year's. Like when Journey was nominated, one of the things I was nominated against was the thing that 11 months earlier had won the Oscar for, it was a French film, silent film called The Artist, and a French composer named Ludovic Bourse. He won the Oscar for that score. Yeah. And he was nominated in the Grammys in that same category that Journey was, back before they split games apart.
So when did Assassin's Creed Valhalla come out?
Valhalla, I think came out. This was the DLC. So
I missed that. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of people, in fact, this is what confused people, because it's not just DLC, because there've been 2 Valhalla DLCs, Siege of Paris and The Dawn of Ragnarok. So hilariously, the other Ragnarok is what won the first video game Grammy.
Yeah. Okay, I didn't realize that.
The composer is a woman named Stephanie Economou. Amazingly enough, those 2 DLCs as one thing was her first ever work in games. She's mostly done film and TV before this.
Wow.
So I was like, hell of a start. Well done. She's wonderful. She's just a wonderful person, cleally very talented, and has a long track record. It's not like she's some fresh out of college person or anything like that. Or even if she was, it wouldn't matter. They don't care. No. What matters is the work, and obviously also the visibility. Like Assassin's Creed is an immediately knowable name. Yeah. I was going to say there's 3 things that govern why this list is so different from like DICE or the Game Awards or whatever. So 1 is the release window. Yeah. 2 is the Grammys don't go looking for the best thing. You submit to them.
Right.
And a lot of record labels and things did not know this was coming and didn't get their shit together very quickly. So there were a lot of games. Now, there are some that, for the life of me, I couldn't fathom how they weren't nominated. Like, I voted for and was very passionate and would have been all too happy to lose to Horizon Forbidden West, for example. It was on the list. How it didn't get enough to make the final nominees was baffling to me. I thought it was just absolutely tremendous score.
So you're able to vote even though you were nominated?
Yeah, well, I mean, you can. I've been a Recording Academy member for
so 11 everyone years who's a member of the Recording Academy. I mean, it's only one of you. What's it going to do? It's just that, like, for the stuff I've been on, I was not allowed to be in any voting category for any game that I worked on in any capacity.
Because because it's like a voting body. That's different than it's being a committee. You know, like I've definitely been on awards committees like DICE and BAFTA, where if I worked on a thing, you obviously have to say like, hey, I scored this thing that's like in your pool. In the case of BAFTAs, they just straight up were like, then you're not, if you're a viable nominee, you're not going to be on the committee.
They kicked me out of narrative because of Cyberpunk. So I did a different thing for BAFTA that year.
Yeah. Same. The year that Pathless came out, they put me on the, like Games for Change or whatever it's called, I ended up on the sort of like making the world a better place BAFTA committee. I can't remember what it's called, which is awesome. Yes. It was a really different experience.
You play such like different games. They are really, really cool.
And you play them through a very different lens of like, it doesn't matter if it's even a good game, or if it's well done, or if it's buggy, or what you're looking at. Like, is this a game that has the potential to, if the right person played this, it would actually really kind of alter their thinking about the world.
I love those. They're really cool. It was half the time I've never heard of them. They're really good.
Same. But the release window being weird, the fact that the labels and all that have to nominate. Now, the credit to the Game Audio Network Guild, which is like our kind of group of composers and audio directors and whatnot, they actually made a deal with the Recording Academy where they could submit on behalf of non-members in order to ensure that a lot of games got submitted. So probably half the things that were submitted were because the Game Audio Network Guild was just churning through the paperwork to make sure that nobody went unnoticed. But even still, not everybody, I mean, the fact that, you know, when I tweeted, congrats, Stephanie, and there were people going, there's a game Grammy? Like, there's still people that just had no idea.
And because of you.
Yeah, and that's okay. It'll take time.
Yeah.
The third thing that's worth mentioning is because games, while they've been eligible for a long time, Journey's the only one that ever slipped through in the entire 20-year period that games have been eligible for a Grammy.
How does that work? They've been eligible, but that means people just weren't nominated?
They were always voting for film and TV scores. And even TV was heavily marginalized in favor of film. Like, rare exceptions. Game of Thrones got nominated. Stranger Things got nominated.
So the most popular shows on the planet.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But nothing. But it takes being that basically to compete with whatever the biggest films were, because invariably the list is dominated by John Williams. And I mean, when Journey was nominated, the other nominees were, you know, Lord of the Rings composer Howard Shore, John Williams, Hans Zimmer, Trent Reznor, and Atticus Ross, which is who won, and that the one sort of unknown other than me was Ludovic Boris, who had just won the Oscar though for that film, The Artist.
Yeah.
So not unknown, but kind of unknown. Point being, I know you got to run. The composer community, who is largely voting on these, is overwhelmingly dominated by people who score films and don't know much about games. Because up till now, it was perceived like games matter so little to the Recording Academy, there was no point in trying to join. Now they've created their own. I suspect over the next few years, there's going to be a flood of my friends and colleagues. I certainly hope. I've been advocating for this for 10 years to get my friends in there so we can actually support like what's going on in games and have awareness. Yeah. But now that it has its own category, I think there's going to be a huge drive for people to join. And I suspect what will happen is that over time, the Game Awards, DICE Awards, etc., will start to look a lot closer to the Grammys in terms of like, you know, the games that are really just casting the longest shadow, making the biggest impact are likely to, because people, I get it. I understand. People were like, there was a tweet that I kept getting tagged in over and over the other day where somebody goes, this list of the nominees looks like they just chose 5 games at random.
It is a really strange list. Yeah, it is strange.
And I understand.
But I get it. Like, that's a big thing with people complain, like we've spoken about this before, like snubs. Like, this was snub. Why didn't this get nominated for TV and film, and more so TV? And it's usually just that they didn't nominate it. That whatever production company was responsible for publishing that show didn't nominate it. It doesn't get nominated any other way. Yeah, you have to submit. And that's a thing that I didn't know until like maybe the last couple of years. I was like, why isn't this nominated? Because they didn't nominate it. Like it's on the person who made it to nominate it, which is super interesting.
And sometimes I have a friend who won a BAFTA for a game score, and then did a really high profile game the next year. And I remember it didn't get BAFTA nominated, and I called him and I go, I'm amazed you didn't make the cut. What an injustice. And he goes, you want to know what happened? Someone at the publisher called me, and they like a few days after the cutoff date, they said, hey, did you take care of that, by the way? And he goes, dude, I thought that you were going to take care of it. And they literally just never did the paperwork. And so it didn't make it in time. And so it's like, sorry, no BAFTA for you this year. It's like, so sometimes it is literally that. They just forget. The other thing that I would be remiss not to mention was that when Kim Petras got up and made the claim of being the first trans Grammy winner, with all respect, Wendy Carlos, the original Tron composer, won 3 Grammys in 1969 post-transition and is like considered one of not only the great, truly like the god of electronic music, like nothing short of like almost like the founder of electronic music in many respects. But she was one of the first really high-profile trans artists, at least in music, and like 1968. And won 3 Grammys for
I think
Switched
it's hard
on
to be
Bach.
trans now. Imagine being trans in 1968. That would have been a lot.
Oh yeah, there's some interviews with her where she talks about it that are like she did that album initially as Walter Carlos, and then by the time it was like taking flight was already Wendy Carlos. Although there's an interesting period where she would do live shows still under the name Walter and put on a wig and stuff because was unsure how well it could go in a live show setting, and then later realized, well, fuck it, I am who I am.
That's really interesting. I mean, again, a very different time. It's still hard now. It must have been even harder back then. And that's a great note. It's one of those where I was like, I'm happy for Kim Petras, but I was like, you know, I take it sort of personally because Wendy Carlos is like part of the composer world. It's like, nah, she's a hero to millions of composers for the last like 40 years. Like we got to draw the line on that one. I'm sorry. I stand for Wendy.
Yeah, exactly.
That. Yeah, that's awesome. But anyway, what was it like being there? Like, obviously I do have to run, but what was it like being there in person? Was it cool? Weird?
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, look, it was funny because, you know, Bear is a real close friend, and we kind of, you know, sort of met up on the red carpet and then basically just hung out the entire time until it was over. One highlight moment that was really funny was we kind of snuck out for a while and went and had lunch and with our ladies, and Angela later was like, oh, by the way, who's that YouTube guy that you think is super impressive? He was right behind us, but I didn't want to interrupt you. And it took me a while to realize she was talking about this guy named Jacob Collier, who is like, if you're not familiar with who he is, he is quite possibly the Mozart of today. Like, he is probably the single most talented musician on planet Earth. Like, I'm not exaggerating. The guy is not human.
Damn, Austin.
I'm serious. If you go and watch some of his shit on YouTube, you realize he's just not made of the normal human stuff. I mean, he's like if Data were a musician and could feel and like, but it's that level of brain power and musical power. He is a freak of nature in the best sense.
You really made me want a tangent about this guy that I just learned about, who's like very young and is breaking all these like rock climbing records. Like, just,
do you know his name?
I don't remember. I'd have to look it up, but I could get into like all this crazy shit he's doing.
4-year-old walking up to Everest.
He's 20, and people are calling him the Mozart of climbing because it's like he just kind of came out of nowhere and is just doing shit that like the guy who has a film or documentary made about him who did the free climb of El Capitan. Do you know about that?
No.
The basically like giant rock face in Yosemite. If you've ever been there, it's like very iconic. A guy did a free climb of it, and there is a documentary about him doing that, which is like an insane thing to do. It took hours, no strings, no tools, nothing. Climbs the whole thing. Crazy. Another guy very recently just came and did it. Everyone thought that the first time it was impossible and that no man would ever do that again. And then this young dude just comes and does it. I'll look it up for the next episode so I have more information. But it's really
I'm very curious.
Learning about it really like changed my frame of view that day, because I was like, humans really can do a lot more than we think we're capable of. And what am I doing? Like, I don't want to rock climb. But I was like, what am I doing right now that I didn't think I was capable of? And to be fair, boxing probably is that. But I was like, that's very inspiring of like, I'm not going to go climb a rock face with no tools. But people just fucking doing that stuff and not question, like maybe dumb, but I mostly think it's super inspiring to just be like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to climb that mountain. That's what I do now. Like, all right. Do it.
There's a girl I went to high school with that did Everest.
I want to do Everest just to base camp with my mom. But that's like a bucket list item. Is I want to, especially because I can't walk very far because I have stupid feet and ankle problems. But I was like, I want to train to be able to just get to base camp. I really want to do that at some point.
It is mind blowing how big an investment it's like years of training to kind of gear yourself up for that. Like it's quite, especially with today's, just think about the people 100 years ago, with
people who die, like it's
little more than rope and an axe or whatever. And
there's nothing that you can do to train your brain for, how like for
low oxygen,
high altitude, just kind of lose their minds. There is no training that anybody has found that can prepare you for that.
I mean, what could you? I mean, it's just physiological. It's
even going to high altitudes, you don't actually adjust to it once you leave. You immediately like adjust. But anyway, I have to go. This is super interesting.
Yeah, same.
Obviously, right. Troy and Mike. Troy has a leak. And Mike,
in his body,
he's leaking. He's in the hospital.
He's leaking.
Best of luck to his family.
Exactly.
I'm Alanah, video game writer. That's Austin Winter. He's a video game composer. And we'll see you next time. Bye.